Happy Saturday, friends, and welcome into Beat the Bookie. I'm your host, Liam Griffin. Now, I know what you're all thinking. Why the heck did they let this guy on the show again? I'm going to be honest. You wouldn't be crazy for that thought. The last time I was at this desk, I whiffed big time, ending over $80 in the red. After that disaster, I took a personal retreat to find the keys to sports betting success, and now I'm ready for redemption. Before we get into my picks, let's see how my pal Joe Puccio did last week. And Joe, only 4 Oregon points away from making over $100, but instead, nearly $40 down. You just hate to see it. Let's see where that puts Pooch in our semester-long standings. 3 out of 4, Jesse Cook and Braden Reed still pacing the group. Jack Gordon, what are you doing? You get a job with the Tin Caps and you decide to lose under $50. You just hate to see that. But enough about the past. I'm out for revenge with a full slate of college basketball picks. Let's go.
Hey, Jerry, you better yell! Show me the money! Show me the money!
Our first big game takes us deep into the heart of Texas for a Big 12 showdown between number 2 Houston and 11th ranked Baylor at noon today. When you think of the Cougars, they're typically a very tough, physical team, especially on the defensive end. Houston hasn't let up 70 since its first game of the month against Kansas, and that's a national championship contending team. As for the Bears, they're coming off a loss to BYU on Tuesday. My thoughts about them this season are meh. With the exception of a win over aforementioned BYU and Waco over a month ago, Baylor doesn't have what I'd call a signature win. Meanwhile, Houston beat BYU on the road and knocked off a top 10 Iowa State team earlier this week. To be honest, I don't think either of these teams makes it past the second weekend of March Madness, but I like Kelvin Sampson's squad a little more than Scott Drew's. $10 on Houston to cover a 2.5-point spread. Heading to the ACC, 2 national champions within the last decade square off at 4, with number 10 North Carolina visiting Virginia. Both of these teams have fallen off a bit of a cliff lately. Ever since Armando Bacot declared that the ACC runs through him, the Tar Heels have been run all over to the tune of a measly 2-2 record. On the other hand, the Cavaliers went into Castle Coliseum and lost to Virginia Tech by 34. Neither team is playing its best basketball right now, but here's the reason I'm leaning UNC. Hubert Davis-Sponge hasn't played in a week, and they beat VT by 15. UVA played on Monday. No, it's a difference of only 2 days. Having a full week in between games at this point of the season goes a long way. North Carolina's roster is incredibly well built and way too talented to stay down for too long. While Virginia has been up and down all season long, I think it stays down for now. $10 on the Tar Heels to beat the Cavaliers by 3 or more. Our final big game takes us down south for a top 25 showdown between 13th ranked Alabama and number 17 Kentucky at 4 today. Things have been unpredictable in the land where it just means more this year. Take the last week for both these teams. Bama knocked off Florida in an overtime thriller, while UK lost on a last-second shot to LSU. But with all this uncertainty in the SEC, one thing is certain. The Tide do not play well outside of Tuscaloosa against good competition. Alabama has lost to Purdue, Creighton, Arizona, Tennessee, and Auburn away from home this season. The Wildcats have underwhelmed this season with an 18-8 record, well below the norm for a John Calipari-led team. But I don't trust the Tide to travel to Lexington and emerge with a victory. $10 left to play with in big games, so I'll wager it on Kentucky to cover -1.5 against Alabama this afternoon. Now, for the million-dollar question. Are the producers on my side? Let's take a look and find out. Wow, someone dug back into my Instagram archives. That is a picture from high school graduation, and we're in agreement 2 out of 3. The hosts currently hold a 1-game lead on the C-suite. Houston and UNC aren't going to change all that, but if UK and Bama swings a little bit differently, the hosts could have a 2-game lead, or we could be knotted up. Let's see what happens. All right, time for my bets. Those who know me best know that I'm a Big East and ACC guy at the core, so that's where we'll lean over the next few minutes. A pair of high-powered offenses square off at PNC Arena at 2 o'clock when Boston College meets NC State. The Eagles have tallied 76 points or more in each of their last 3 games, while the same is true for the Wolfpack, and you can even bump that number up to 78. Neither team is a defensive dynamo either, with both sitting in the bottom half of the ACC in points allowed per game, and each team has given up at least 76 in those 3 contests I just alluded to. Both BC and NC State can score at will, and a relatively high line of 149.5 doesn't scare me at all. Both teams hit the over at a rate over 60%, and I like that to continue today. $5 on the Eagles and Wolfpack to combine for 150 points or more. You know what? I like betting the over so much that we're just going to do it again. Duke and Wake Forest have a point spread of 152.5 for today's 2 o'clock tip. And when they're both at their best, both the Blue Devils and Demon Deacons can score in bunches. Kyle Filipowski and Hunter Salas lead the way for their respective squads. Both of them have 4 players that average over 13 points per game. Jeremy Roach, Jared McCain, and Mark Mitchell have been lethal for Duke this year. The same is true for Bookie Miller, Andrew Carr, and Cameron Hildreth at Wake Forest. Add in Blue Devils secondary scoring and shooting with the likes of Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster, while the Demon Deacons offer Efton Reed down low with Parker Fredrickson and Damari Monsanto as threats from deep. Both of these teams have scoring threats out the wazoo. Even though Duke and Wake Forest only combined for 146 when they met a week and a half ago, there's too much offensive talent on both sides for it not to be a high-scoring game once again. The high line doesn't scare me. Duke and Wake will score at least 153 points, $5 on it. At 5 o'clock in the Steel City, you have a pair of teams coming off polar opposite games. Virginia Tech blasted Virginia by 34 points on Monday night, while Pittsburgh endured a 33-point setback to Wake Forest. That's a separation of 67 points, but I omitted a key detail. The Hokies were in the friendly confines of Castle Coliseum, while the Panthers were in enemy territory at LJBM Coliseum. Virginia Tech has been a disaster on the road this season, sitting at just 1-7. Meanwhile, Pitt hasn't lost at home in well over a month. This is a win the Panthers desperately need. They were in Joe Lunardi's next 4 out before the Wake game. Now they're not. They need this win to get back in a relevant conversation to be considered. I'll take them for $10 to cover a 3.5-point spread. Now for the Big East portion of my best bets, we take a look at a pair of tournament hopeful teams as Butler visits Seton Hall at 8:30. This is the final leg of a 4-game gauntlet for the Bulldogs. They lost to both Marquette and Creighton in Indianapolis and couldn't knock off Villanova on the road either. The Pirates are about to enter a similar gauntlet themselves, with trips to Creighton and UConn and a visit from Villanova on the horizon. This is a game both teams badly need. According to Joe Lunardi, Seton Hall is clinging on to a tournament berth, while Butler is falling further and further behind on the bubble. I think it's going to be a competitive 40 minutes, but what ultimately has me leaning Pirates is when these two teams met in Indianapolis, the Bulldogs couldn't defend home court in a 6-point loss. This time around, Seton Hall will have its home crowd backing it at the Prudential Center, and that will help the Pirates cover a 3.5-point spread, $10 on it. Elsewhere in the Big East, let's now assess the reigning champs and number 1 team in all the land, UConn, and its clash with Villanova at 8 tonight. The Huskies likely won't be the number 1 team in all the land anymore after their loss to Creighton earlier this week, but the good news is that they get a Wildcats team that has turned into a pumpkin on the road recently. Ever since the calendar turned to 2023, Villanova has lost its road games by an average of over 10 points against teams not named Georgetown. That includes a 13-point loss to another Big East title contender in Marquette. Additionally, when playing in the Nutmeg State this season, the Huskies have devoured their prey to a 14-0 record, including a pair of dominant wins over Final Four contenders Creighton and Marquette. Dan Hurley is going to have his guys fired up after the loss to Creighton Tuesday night, I should say. Villanova is no match for UConn, especially in an on-campus game at the Gampel Pavilion in Storrs. Hartford residents are going to have to drive half an hour to Storrs for this one, which gives the Huskies an even bigger advantage. I think they run away with it, so $10 on UConn, minus 12.5 against Nova. Moving to my dog of the week, this time we're going to the SEC. I'm going to be honest. I don't have a clue why Ole Miss is favored in its showdown with 20th ranked South Carolina at 3. What have the Rebels done since conference play began? Dwindled in mediocrity. A 13-0 start, yay, cool. But when you're only beating Detroit Mercy by 1 point, that has to be an eyebrow raiser. Not to mention the last time Ole Miss hosted a ranked foe, it didn't go too well. Auburn won by 14. The last team to pay the Rebels a visit in Oxford was a Missouri Tigers squad that is winless in SEC play, and Ole Miss only won by 3. Are you really telling me that the Rebels are ready to beat a ranked Gamecock squad having its best season in a long time? I don't think so. Somehow, South Carolina's money line is plus 128 on it. I'll put $10 on that all night and day. For my future, we look ahead to April 8th in Phoenix, where the Men's March Madness Championship will be held. I want you to flash back 5 years ago and remember who the laughingstock of the college basketball world was. Virginia was reeling from the humiliation of being the first 1 seed to lose to a 16, and it rode that humiliation all the way to a national championship the next year. Purdue finds itself in a very similar position. Zach Edey and company had, in my opinion, a far more humiliating loss than Virginia did when it lost to a Fairleigh Dickinson team that only made the tournament because the Northeast Conference champion Merrimack was transitioning from D1 to D2. Yes, that is a stupid rule. There's just something about being a top seed, getting upset stunningly quickly, then bouncing back to win the championship. 2019 Virginia, the 2020 Tampa Bay Lightning. I'm looking at you, Boston Bruins, and for the sake of this show, looking for 2024 Purdue to add its name to that club. Put 5 good ones on the Boilermakers to win the national championship. That'll pocket you over $37. Hopefully that future bet cashes along with all the other futures we're currently waiting on. Jack Gordon's first touchdown Super Bowl, Isaiah Pacheco, didn't go too great. Aaron Judge is not going to lead the AL in home runs again. Sorry, Joe Puccio. Boston University could win the men's ice hockey championship. Flyers playoffs, I'm not 100% sure, but you can book the Boilermakers winning the national championship this year. It's time for my parlay, and it's a simple one. 4 moneyline plays, all stemming from the ACC. Stick with me. Here we go. First up, I'll take NC State to beat Boston College at home. The Eagles lost to the Wolfpack in Chestnut Hill in December, and their only 2 ACC road wins are against the conference's little sisters of the poor in Georgia Tech and Notre Dame. Speaking of Georgia Tech, Miami will take care of business in Coral Gables tomorrow. The Hurricanes will come in hot after a blowout loss to Duke Wednesday, while the Yellow Jackets have just 1 conference road victory. Heading back to Pittsburgh, we'll take the money line over Virginia Tech as opposed to the spread as a safety blanket of sorts. The final ACC leg sees Clemson knocking off Florida State. The Tigers beat the Seminoles by 11 in Tallahassee, not to mention FSU has lost 5 of its last 7. I understand those 4 plays aren't exactly risky, but I couldn't care less about that if it means money will be in my pocket. If you put $15 on the Wolfpack, Hurricanes, Panthers, and Tigers to take care of business today, you'll net over $37. To recap, Houston taking care of business against an in-state foe in Baylor. Carolina covering on the road at John Paul Jones Arena and Virginia. The Wildcats to take down the Tide at Rupp Arena. A pair of ACC overs in Raleigh and Winston-Salem. Pitt to bounce back at home at the Peterson Event Center against Virginia Tech. A pair of Big East plays as well. Seton Hall to pick up a big tournament-boosting victory against Butler. UConn to bounce back and thrash Villanova. Again, I have no idea how South Carolina is an underdog against Ole Miss. That feels like free money to me, so we took the moneyline play. $5 on Purdue to pull up Virginia and Tampa Bay Lightning and win March Madness. Jacob Morris earlier today called me a jinx for that pick. Well, we'll see who's laughing in April, JMO. And it'll probably be both of us since he's a Purdue fan. Then 4 ACC moneyline picks for my parlay. Not very risky, I know, but we like money, and that's the way to do it. Now, the last time I was at this desk, I ended the show by saying fade my picks at your own risk, and it blew up in my face spectacularly. So this time, I'll end on this. Not saying you should take my picks, but I'm not saying you shouldn't. A nice middle ground to say so long on. With my producers, Jordan Leonard, Arnav Parkrell, and everyone else behind the scenes, I'm Liam Griffin. Thanks for hanging out with me. Enjoy college hoops, and please bet responsibly.